My name is Roger Harrabin. I'm the BBC's Energy and Environment Analyst. I am absolutely passionate about urban issues. My dad was a builder. Both my brothers are in property, mainly in Coventry. My youngest brother has set up the Coventry Historic Trust to find new ways of breathing life into Coventry's very many historic buildings. It was the fourth biggest city in medieval England, and the council have not been able to find new ways of making money for them. So my brother has formed this charitable foundation to try to use design principles to bring old buildings back to life. So I've had that thread running right the way through my family. My best friends are all architects. And when I was 14, I actually wanted to be an architect until I confided that ambition to the art teacher, and he guffawed, "Oh, boy, you can't even draw." Anyway, that dashed my architectural ambition. But later on, I kind of made up for it. I became a designer of a women's colour magazine. So I have this absolutely in my blood, and it's really, really great to be participating in this discussion about the proposal for a design quality unit. It's really terrific. Clearly, the quality of design in the UK is extremely patchy. One of my brothers now lives opposite Farringdon Station. I don't know, those of you who know Farringdon Station, I shake my head in disbelief when I walk past it. It's such a pile of rubbish. And recently my son has moved to Acton, and it was a cycle ride for me past Acton Main Line, and that looks like, I mean, it's early days yet, it looks like it's also going to be really awful. So how do we prevent these terrible blotches on our landscape? Hopefully we'll come to some conclusions on that in the next period. So first of all, today we are going to hear from Matthew Carmona, who's chair of the Place Alliance, professor of Planning and Urban Design at UCL, on why a DQU is needed. Before I do that, actually, I've got to do some housekeeping. So let me just ask Olga to flip me the slide, if you could. So that is to say that recording is in progress. If you don't want to be recorded, just click yourself off camera and put yourself onto mute. I mean, you've been muted anyway centrally, but just to make sure, if you don't want to be recorded or seen, that's easily done. Next slide, please, Olga. And this is how you're going to comment and ask questions. You're going to go down to the bottom of your page and click on the bar where it says something or other, where it says chat, and then you're going to type in your chat and press return. And one of my colleagues here will be sorting out questions and comments from the very many of you that are in this virtual space. Anyway, now we can have the next slide and really go to Matthew Carmona. So Matthew, over to you.
Thank you very much, Roger. So now what I need to do is share my screen, and then does that work? Doesn't look right to me.
Well, nothing so far.
No, you need to share your screen and pick your presentation to share.
Okay, let me share my screen again. Aha, that's why I forgot to press the share button. Fatal mistake. So now I will start my presentation.
And yeah.
There we are. Okay, we're off. So there's absolutely no doubt that in this country, we can build wonderful living environments when we turn our minds to it. And of course, the Sterling Prize winning Goldsmiths Street in Norwich, as shown here, represents a shining example of that. But just, just 3 miles east, as the crow flies, is Miller's Field. No longer a field, as you can see in the slides, but everything that is wrong with the majority of new housing developments in England. Now, just over a year ago, the Place Alliance published Place Value and the Ladder of Place Quality. This summarises hundreds of pieces of research evidence and positions them on a sort of simple ladder with good quality principles at the top and poor quality at the bottom. And unsurprisingly, Goldsmiths Street ticked all the boxes to appear at the top of this place quality ladder. It's connected, it's walkable, it's green, it's part of a mixed area, low traffic, compact and coherent. It's good at helping to build community. Fundamentally, these are the qualities that are good for us, environmentally, socially, economically, and in terms of health outcomes. By contrast, Miller's Field ticks all the boxes at the bottom of the ladder. It is disconnected, dominated by parking, hard surfaces, single use, car dependent, sprawling, and potentially socially isolating as well. It's fundamentally bad for us, these types of environments, economically, socially, environmentally, and in terms of health. Only made worse in the current environment when COVID-19 is, of course, forcing many of us to remain at home. Many of us, that means suffering the consequences of poor housing design 24 hours a day. The truly sad thing, of course, is that Miller's Field is not the exception, it's the norm. As our recently published Housing Design Audit for England showed, 3/4 of new housing developments in England are mediocre or poor in their design, many of which should never have been given planning permission in the first place. And unfortunately, it's the least affluent who are often the most affected by this poor design. The audit starkly revealed a systemic failure of house builders, local authorities, and central government to deal adequately with design. And arguably, this is a failure that goes back decades. But there is now a positive momentum building to tackle the problem. Government have been making increasingly positive noises about the importance of good design. MHCLG are leading a range of valuable initiatives to fill gaps in policy and guidance, such as the National Design Guide. The audit itself helped to reveal the size and the nature of the problem that we face. Nobody anymore can pretend that this is a problem which doesn't exist. And of course, the Building Better, Building Beautiful Commission has revealed a range of valuable recommendations to tackle these issues in a much more joined up and coherent manner. But we need to act now, and we need to act with much greater conviction. Elsewhere in the UK, governments have established influential advisory units that seek to drive the achievement of design quality up their national agendas. In Europe, increasingly countries are adopting approaches which see design quality as a critical cultural asset and which systematically works to build cultural expectations of good urban design. England, unfortunately, is being left behind. And that's why today we are publishing collectively the range of organisations at the bottom of the screen, this document, Delivering Urban Quality, Time to Get Serious. In it, we argue that to drive the necessary cultures change, and that will require focus, design capacity, determined leadership, and proper resourcing. All the more important now as we look to the housing industry to help drive us out of the recession. We cannot afford another race to the bottom as we had after the after the financial crisis. Our proposition is that government should start by setting up a dedicated design quality unit for England in order to confront the challenges head on and focus attention on the delivery of better design. With that, I'll pass on to Sarah, Chris, and David to help explain how. First of all, on to Sarah Weir.
Thank you, Matthew. Right, I'm just going to share my screen as well.
Sarah, can I just check? Am I muted? Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Oh, that's fine. Okay, because one of us has to say this is Sarah Weir, OBE, Chief Executive of the Design Council. And she's starting to talk about how a small unit that Matthew proposed, how that such a unit might operate.
Thank you. Can everybody see the screen?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay, so I'm just going to set the scene by taking us back to 1944. And this was when the Design Council was actually set up as the Council for Industrial Design. A time of immense change, a time when we didn't know what the government didn't know what the economy was going to be after the war. There had been a housing crisis, news blackout, and quite a demoralised public. And they set the Council for Industrial Design up as a key part of the economic renewal of the country at that time. So here we are 75 years later from that very bold moment. And Proposition 45, which was in the response to the Better Building Beautiful Commission that Matthew mentioned, is a commitment to continue working on what came out of that commission. And rather than put it to one side, but that isn't enough. That can't be enough. This can't just be a task and finish group. So as the government of the day realised in 1944, and we must recognise now, we need something that is bold, longer term and authoritative, and something that is local, regional and national. So a body that's independent and that can give authoritative advice to government, local government and industry, and one also that will give confidence to the country that design is being taken seriously. This rather beautiful plate was it was created as an homage to the artist Louise Bourgeois. It was a homemade cloth book, and it was called Ode to Forgetting in 2004, which feels particularly apt today because we have that high quality, we have the expertise around the country. It just needs to be beautifully stitched together as it is here. So a national design quality unit should be small at its core, so that it can work across government, industry, the professions and across the country, using a sort of partnership and networked approach so that we create a patchwork plate and don't just have a patchwork of a patchwork of pieces, I beg your pardon. And the reason that this is so important is we already knew in the without COVID world, and that we've seen it only too clearly now in the with COVID world, that working at home is really poor for many, many people. Matthew mentioned this: cramped conditions, too little light, no outdoor space, poor ventilation, and the list goes on. And we really can't collectively bury our heads in the sand and ignore that any longer. Because the with COVID world is going to require many of us to work at home for many, many years without those issues. And a national design quality unit is required to make that possible. We've all seen pictures like this. This wasn't taken in the this was taken years ago in the without COVID world, and it's not empty because of lockdown. It's empty because of a lack of thoughtful, joined up design. So a place without purpose, without joy, and therefore, of course, without people. And again, the with COVID world we're now in has brought sharply into focus just how important our green spaces are across the country. They should be designed in at the start so that they are a right, not just a privilege. And we haven't got time to waste. This project, the Older Women's Co-op in Barnet, took 18 years to happen. Many of the older women actually died waiting for it to happen. And I think you can see from this picture, this resident who was in from the start, how absolutely delighted she is to have co-designed her home. But 18 years just is ridiculous. And at a time when the national COVID-19 furlough scheme got designed and set up from scratch in just a few days by some superbly dedicated civil servants working quietly behind the scenes, and ensured over 7.5 million people got paid some wages, we surely have to change our ways. And in terms of changing our ways, the thing that struck me so forcibly at the RIBA Sterling Prize Awards where of course Goldsmiths won, as Matthew mentioned, was that the winners, they were at two tables quite nearby to me. There was a whoop of joy. And then what was so brilliant is that the cry went up for everybody to go up onto the stage, which they did. And those people are not the ones that you would normally see on a stage for a prize like that. So we must be expansive, we must be bold, we must look out to the changed COVID world. We must have a soaring long-term vision with clear, well-described, realistic short-term changes. And they must be developed with a much wider range of voices. This PC organ in Croatia was designed in 2005. That site was destroyed in World War II, was first replaced by a monotonous concrete wall, and is now also a sound art piece with pipes which play music, and it won the prize for European Public Space in 2006. And so to end, instead of the war analogies, which are being bandied around quite a lot at the moment, I think this is much more appropriate. This is Militant Fawcett by Gillian Waring in Parliament Square for 2008. Courage is calling us. Heed the call. Stand up, reach out, join up with others so that people will be talking about what we did now in 2120 and beyond. But we must therefore get serious about a national policy design unit to do that, and start now, making life better by design. Thank you.
Sarah, thank you very much. I just want to ask you a question before we move on, Sarah, because that was a absolutely stirring rallying call. But you mentioned COVID. The country is bankrupt. People are nervous about buying houses. There is a possibility that everybody will now be looking to the cheapest first, and that the ideas you're proposing are going to look rather expensive.
No, I don't agree that they're necessarily going to look expensive. Designing something well does not necessarily mean more expense. It may mean more thought, and it may mean having more people in the conversation at the beginning, but that doesn't make it more expensive.
Okay, splendid. Let's move on now to Chris Martin, who is co-founder and director of the Urban Movement. Chris.
Thanks, Roger. I'll just share my screen if you don't mind. So, hopefully that's all very clear. I've been reflecting a lot recently that never before has central or local government, the press or the general public been as interested in the design of our towns and cities as we are today. We've heard so much about what the COVID world means for our towns and cities, the way we'll live, the way we'll move, the way we'll work. And this is likely because now more than ever, we've been made acutely aware of the negative effects that certain urban conditions can have on our lives, and in particular, our health, happiness, and prosperity. Yet for the most part, we've been living with these conditions for some time. Before living with this crisis, we were living with others. An obesity crisis, for example, a loneliness crisis, and an air quality crisis. Excuse me. And rather than being separate, these crises have always been shown to be linked with and even exacerbate the current health pandemic. And for the large part, they're the result of the environments we have chosen to deliver. As Matthew's mentioned earlier, the Housing Design Audit for England and the Building Better, Building Beautiful Commission have highlighted the problems and dissatisfactions with the places we have delivered previously. But now, at a time when there is so much attention on the places we call home and so much energy to collectively act, we must capitalise on today and accurately channel this collective endeavour by using design to help us tackle the future crisis we face. The collective suffering we've experienced over the last months has moved us from I to we, from self-interest to care about the common good, I believe. We must rescue some blessing from this curse, and I believe a design quality unit would operate to ensure this by inspiring rather than dictating. It would be completely absurd if after the unprecedented efforts and sacrifices we have made to save thousands of lives from this current crisis, we allowed thousands more to be cut short by the devastating impacts of air pollution, for example. The unit should work to support community initiative as well as top-down change in this field and others like it. This is also the time to shape the future we want for our children, and the unit should help to facilitate the numerous local actions and initiatives we have seen emerge, for example, around making places better for urban childhoods and streets and spaces safer for community life. In terms of the places we design and deliver, we have resisted arguments for change based on health, making people happier, and giving everyone a chance for too long. The design quality unit needs to be the catalyst that moves us on from this. continuously supporting bottom-up campaigns as well as top-down change, helping to facilitate local actions and initiatives and inspiring delivery of quality through promoting current best practice and duty and facilitating people and disciplines coming together. A design quality unit is an appropriate legacy for this crisis and a necessary tool to prevent the next. It would help ensure that the good intentions we've heard about, making places where people can thrive, learning from this situation, and protecting the sense of community we've built, come to pass, to fill words with action. The unit will monitor the quality of what is being delivered across the built environment against current best practice, policy and guidance to make sure we can be proud of what the UK's design of UK design output. It will challenge what it sees and ask questions to enable continual improvement. It would inspire us all to do better and inspire us all to deliver quality design in the built environment that individually and collectively we are proud of and others want to learn from. I must say, I'm enjoying the reinvigoration of intercity competition we're seeing at the moment. Currently, there are towns and cities globally even that are transforming their streets and spaces and neighbourhoods into places where people can safely walk, cycle and play, or enjoyably sit outside cafes, bars and restaurants to reinvigorate the economy and social life, are the places where eyes are drifting and attention is shifting. Following this crisis, global competition for business and staff will dramatically increase, and quality of life, community, and a healthy environment will be the battleground on which places will win or lose. The unit will inspire actions that make the UK competitive in this field. The crisis has brought into sharp focus the places we need to benefit our health and quality of life and help our communities to thrive. The immediate solution to this crisis has been space, and the unit will work to ensure that space will be the commodity that we consider more carefully going forward, promoting how we can use the space we have to tackle the future crises we will face. We have once again seen firsthand humanity's capacity to change, to protect others and community. We now need to harness this strength and the power of design to recover from this crisis and prevent the next. The harm from the emerging environmental crisis will be slower than this pandemic, but more massive, longer lasting, and ubiquitous. If there's a moment to show bravery in heading off that disaster, this is it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chris. I just want to ask a question here, which is that, you know, local authorities and developers have known for many, many years now what would be the best places for people to live. They haven't built them for all sorts of different reasons. Very often, as you know, good, sensible plans get agreed, and then as they go along through the system, the developers say, well, we can't do that, and we can't afford this, and we can't afford that. And if you make us afford this, then we won't be able to build these vitally needed social houses that you want, and eventually good intentions get eroded. And I'm wondering how you think that this unit could make any change to that, what seems at the moment an inevitable system.
I think there's many ways, and I think a huge part of it is bringing people together from day one. I think lots of the times, as you say, things move through the planning process, through different fields, through different professions, through different interests, and all the time people are adding their 10 pence. And the developers, basically, a lot of the time you hear it's sort of death by 1,000 cuts, and rather than one sort of call for unanimous design at the beginning, people sit around at the table, or a figurative table at the beginning, and the developer comes out of that meeting knowing exactly what they need to deliver. They can then budget for that. These things work when people know from day one what they're in for, and then they can work out how it works. It goes back to the point made earlier about these things don't necessarily cost more, it just requires more thought. And if that thought happens at the beginning, everyone can then have be singing off the same hymn sheet going forwards, and there are no surprises, which is what makes development fall, because people just can't comprehend it from the beginning.
Okay, thank you very much. I should say, by the way, there are more than 400 people in this meeting, which is really impressive, from all around the UK, and apparently even one or more people from Norway. So welcome to Norway, and a personal thanks from me for The Twin, which was absolutely fantastic on BBC. And if you haven't seen it, I do recommend that you catch up with it. A brilliant Norwegian series. So thank you, Norway. Anyway, we're now going to hear from David Rudlin, former chair of the Academy of Urbanism and director of Urbed. David.
Thank you. I'm hoping that Olga is going to share my slides. I only have 3. You'll be pleased to hear, which is unusual for an urban designer, I know. If we can go to the next one. we've had a really fascinating range of discussions going right back to autumn, even though it was all by Zoom or Microsoft Teams, about this process and about the role that it would take. We've agreed on many things, and you've heard many of those in the discussions up until now. We weren't necessarily fully agreed on how this would sit. It'd be interesting to get conversations going in this group about how this unit would sit. I mean, at one extreme, it could be within government. It could be under the auspices of the chief architect, potentially. On the other hand, it could be an entirely independent organisation. The former perhaps lacking independence, the latter lacking influence, perhaps. So there is probably some territory in a hybrid between that. The Office for Budget Responsibility seemed to us like a good model, an organisation which is very authoritative in its voice and yet also independent of government. If we go to the next slide, please, Olga. I think we'll be accused of trying to reinvent CABE here. I mean, let's be honest, let's put that on the table. And I think we probably wouldn't make much headway if that is what we were doing. I think what we're talking about is something much smaller, much more reactive, much more a hub of a existing network of organisations, because unlike when CABE was first set up, we now have a whole range of regional organisations, design review panels and so on, doing much of this work. What we're talking about is the hub which helps to pull those together. Our model, I think, is Architecture and Design Scotland. You don't need to go very far to find a very good model for an organisation like this. Core staff of about 25, a cost of about 1.7 million a year, not huge amounts. I mean, it sounds like a lot of money, but actually in terms of the investment we're making at the moment in all sorts of things, not a huge amount of money at all. And we have to remember the size of the problem that we're addressing here. As Matthew said, 3/4 of housing schemes are either mediocre or poor. So there is a huge job to be done, and we think a fairly small lever could make a massive difference in this respect. And just to put that in context, this is 2% of the value of an average housing scheme. It's 0.2% of the housing investment announced in the budget. So 0.02%, sorry. So small amounts of money could have a huge impact in this respect. So if I could go to my last slide, Olga, thank you. It's time to get serious. I mean, my BD column, which is published this morning, does, I'm afraid, Sarah, make the wartime analogy, because actually during these times of crisis, we do amazing things. We build hospitals in 7 days. We create schemes in a very short amount of time. And at some point during the war, the discussion always changes from winning the war to winning peace. And that just doesn't happen. So my inbox is full at the moment of a messaging which says, now more than ever, we need to address quality design or address the climate emergency or create placemaking. And the reality is that doesn't happen on its own. Despite all our good intentions, this doesn't happen without us doing something about it. And the way we generally do something about this type of thing is organisational, is that we bottle that optimism in an organisation which can then take it forward, but we all have to go back to doing our daily lives. And so the Design Quality Unit is that organisation which, as Chris said, can be a fantastic legacy from this pandemic, which can take all that momentum that was building up earlier in the year through the Building Better, Building Beautiful Commission, others like Range and so on, and take it forward and actually make a real difference this time. So I commend it to this fantastic group of people. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, David. Just fill in a bit about what you think this unit can achieve that CABE did not achieve.
Well, I think it's wrong to say CABE didn't achieve anything. I think CABE achieved a huge amount. And in terms of, people look back nostalgically to the work that CABE did, both sort of systematizing good design, training, and talking, promoting ideas of design. I think we can do all that stuff. The one thing CABE did that we don't think this should do is design review. Design review became a bit of a sort of lightning rod for criticisms of CABE because of all sorts of issues around that. We think design review is now done very well at the local level, but actually having someone who can talk to governments, who can call out bad design when it's seen, who can promote good design to practitioners, to developers and so on, is a role which is really missing at the moment.
Okay, thank you very much, David. Do go to the chat box if you want to comment. We've got a lot of chat coming in already, so please do join that if you want. We'll hear some first responses now to those proposals. Firstly, from Andrew Taylor, who's Director and Head of Planning for Countryside Developers. Do give us a few thoughts, Andrew, on what you've heard.
Thank you, Roger. Yes, Andrew Taylor, Head of Planning for Countryside Properties. We're a master developer and house builder across the country, and we've just been asked to give a few initial thoughts from our perspective about the ideas that have been set out today. I think design and quality and the broader comments I've seen, it's not just about urban design or building design, it's about the landscape as well. They are key to the success of developments. And you've got to remember that not all developers are the same and different people approach things in different ways. It's not just about creating something that people can be proud of, but actually it also helps to attract purchasers, and it certainly adds a value perspective as well. And that's therefore a benefit from the developer's perspective, but it actually gives back long-term value to the local communities by investing in that design and quality. We've focused on that for many years, but it's fair to say that not everybody has done, and we don't get it right all the time, and that's also true. And we can learn just as much as other people. But one of the most important things is about having that focus on quality across the industry to bring up the level of development and delivery for everybody. But one of the big problems that we find is a consistency across different councils, either in terms of the design staff they have or don't have, the lack of capacity to enter into meaningful discussions early. And for me, while the over design quality unit is a good idea, and I'll touch on that in a moment, actually ensuring we have the necessary capacity with the local authorities to deal with design, deal with planning applications and respond in a knowledgeable way, we won't be able to move forward. So one of the things that the design quality unit can do is have that overarching approach, bring people together, support the councils, support the different design views, have a range of consistency across the country where that we can all move forward together. As I mentioned, that there are a wide variety of approaches across the country. And from a developer who works in different councils, different council areas, different counties, different regions, actually that consistency is really important. There's been a lot of talk recently about modern methods of construction and having a standardized approach to housing in terms of house types or floor plans. And actually, if we can have some consistency and feed into those processes, that will help us in terms of improving our design at an early stage. So, in summary, supportive of the idea of a collective, collaborative approach, looking at consistency across the country, something that could provide a coordinating role to all the councils across the country, looking at a design review, looking at supporting councils, but most importantly, we need to make sure that we have the resources and the local authorities to be able to deliver and respond to design proposals as they come forward. Thank you.
That is an absolutely key caveat, isn't it? You know, we're talking now at a time of unprecedented local government cuts, and we all know that as soon as a local government faces cuts, the last thing that they cut is social care, because there are deaths involved and because people tend not to like that. And where they look first is the planning department, because nobody cares if a few planners get the sack. Sorry, did you hear me or not?
Oh, sorry. Yes, no, you're right. You know, there is different across the country. You have different councils are responding differently. Obviously, within two-tier authorities, planning departments can be protected a little bit more because they don't have quite the focus as you have on single-tier authorities. But actually, we need to make sure that it's not just the planners, it's the design, it's the landscape, it's the ecologists across the councils. We need to make sure that those professionals are there to feed into that design process to make sure that what we get and what we can deliver is appropriate and for purpose for our communities that we all serve.
Okay, thank you. Well, very appropriately now we're going to hear from Laura Alvarez, who's Senior Principal in Urban Design and Conservation Officer for Nottingham City Council. Laura, would you like to offer a few thoughts on Andrew's comment there before you move on to what you were planning to say?
Good morning. Yes, what I was going to say is very similar actually to what Andrew said. I was going to give a little overview as to how the unit could support authorities and the issue of skills, and also a number of other things. So I think it's a good continuation if I just go on to what I was going to say, because it does answer some of, or re-strengths some of the comments that Andrew did. So if that's okay, shall I just start my comments then? So the view that I'm going to give is from local authorities and mainly in the regions, particularly the Midlands where I'm based. And local authorities have recently been working, well, for years now, trying to raise design quality really hard. Nottingham has adopted Building for Life, Manual for Streets a long time ago. Of course, Nottingham is a unitary authority, so that helps a lot because planners and urban designers can sit alongside highways colleagues. We know how difficult it is when we have 2 tiers. We do have resources such as our own independent design review panel. There are regional design review panels available for authorities, but there are times when design review is not appropriate as a resource. For instance, if we have to develop a large area master plan or a strategy that cannot be evaluated at a specific point, but it needs more sporadic but continuous support across different fields. I think the design review has its merits, but it's not something that we could apply to everything we do. The city works with consultants, as many other authorities do as well, as we know. But the problem is that the budgets are tight and sometimes the support needed is tiny. We might need a comment or pointing out towards a good example, something like that. In those cases, the use of consultants is actually not cost effective for authorities, and it can be quite time consuming as well to organize all the bits of consultancy we need. So having a centralized design quality unit could help in that sense, having a central network of support. A few years back, Nottingham received some planning delivery fund from the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government, and the city used that budget to develop the design quality framework, which is essentially a series of supplementary planning documents that zoom in onto the national design guide characteristics and look at how those could be delivered at a local level. So what we've done with those guides is try to contribute also to deliver the city's carbon reduction priorities. We worked really hard on that. Delivery of that was difficult, but perhaps the implementation is even what we struggled with more. It was a huge undertaking for Nottingham, and the city needed a vast set of skills to do it, but also the capacity for officers to do their daily jobs on top of that. And Nottingham is one of the cities with the largest capacity regarding urban design and planning, and yet the team was stretched to deliver this framework. At times we needed critical friends, some expertise in different fields, with experience across the UK. And Nottingham, let's face it, it had a budget dedicated to design quality. And most of the budget was actually spent on consultants' fees. Other authorities don't have that luxury, and it's going to get tougher, as we said before. A design quality unit maybe would have supported us a lot and would have made the budget work a lot harder, perhaps covering other areas, or it would have helped us do engagement in a way that we could deliver some social targets simultaneously through the process. A resource with the national and international best practices, some delivery tools, some network expertise would have helped us to get to the right people at the right time when we needed support. On the other hand, now Nottingham developed this quality framework, and it has a lot of useful tools for local authorities who haven't got the capacity or the budget to deliver their own. So the design unit could be a forum where we can share our knowledge, the tools that we developed, and all the cities are leading in other areas as well. Could be somewhere where we can look at success stories across the UK, because we tend to see good design, but in places where they are more affluent. But we need to start pointing out to where good design is, where budgets are not as available. Having worked across the regions and in various industries as a design consultant, I sort of sometimes feel that we are kind of reinventing the wheel all the time. The key design problems seem to be always the same, but what varies the most is the balance of powers involved in the process of delivering quality. And we know that house builders are regularly blamed for poor quality, but they face barriers too. Anything from planning to highways or maintenance can sometimes make them give a step back and lowering the quality of their proposals. I have seen that happening. And on the other hand, we have local authorities that cannot match housing to public transport infrastructure. And we start with developments that are unsustainable from the outset. So the lack of regional planning in transport infrastructure provision and the focus on delivering housing numbers now has left us with car-dependent estates. And it's difficult to deliver good design when you start with a bad starting point. So we can't ignore that house building is central to the country's housing delivery. There are some examples of good practice in housing, not many, but we can look at them and learn from them, and maybe this design forum can do that. Perhaps we can learn how some people manage to overcome the barriers without compromising design quality, which is a skill in its own right. And understanding negotiation as a strategy to push design quality is as important as actually having those design skills in the first place. Maybe a design quality unit could have champions on these topics, or offer some sort of neutral common ground, a place where everybody from all different angles can go and find a helping hand, whether it might be in relation to a design issue or whether it might be to do with the process itself and how to manage trade-offs so that we can achieve better quality along the way. In summary, I think I speak on behalf of a lot of colleagues across the Midlands when I say that we would welcome a design quality unit, but we do need something that is based outside London or that has some sort of powerhouse in the north, because that would fit a wider government agenda, and it also would start to begin to rebalance some of the regional disadvantages, which are pretty obvious. I personally would support the unit in whichever way I can, and good luck.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, I just heard recently that the 5-story IKEA in Coventry City Centre is being closed, so perhaps you can move into that and repurpose it. That would be a very useful thing to do. I mean, I did find myself slightly despairing sometimes during your comments there, because some of them are just so true and the obstacles are so hard. But anyway, let us go now to some questions, because we have absolutely loads. And I think rather than press the button to ask your own question, I'm going to just precede them. So one from Selina Mason here, which is very close to my heart. I used to work on a local newspaper in Coventry and was constantly aghast at what the transport engineers were planning to do, and also at the immense power they had within the council. If the transport engineers didn't agree something, it simply didn't happen. So I'm going to go to a question from Selina Mason. Could somebody comment on the importance of getting people involved in highways to understand design quality and link it to planning policy? Any thoughts on that? Maybe Sarah might have a thought on that.
Yes, thank you, Roger, and thank you, Selina. I completely agree. We've got to join different people up together, and we've actually done quite a lot of work on this. We did some work with Homes England on it, and bringing everybody into the room together, because you have to see other people's perspective to then come up with a different answer. If you just talk to yourself and to people that are like you, if you are a highways engineer or whatever you are, you'll get the same answer. But it is possible. I mean, the Norwich scheme, there's been quite a lot of discussion about that in the chat, and talking about the fact that it wasn't just about design and this and that, it was a visionary client. And the reason that I put up the slide about the people that all went up onto the stage is that that included a much, much wider team of people bringing different perspectives early on. That was 10 years in the making, that scheme. But it's not just that. You look at somewhere like the Mallings in Newcastle, which is an ashtacular scheme, and that's quite dense housing, but it was also, the highways were involved there. It's thinking about how the roads fit with the houses as well. So it's not impossible. It's just about how you break down the barriers. And sometimes you need a translator to help break down barriers between different people speaking different languages.
Okay, thank you. I would like to go to other members of the panel on that, but I'm aware of the time. So I'm going to take some more questions now. One from Simon Khan, who says the future will have to respond to reduced resources and new thinking in the context of COVID and climate crises. How will the design quality unit respond to this? So I think that's maybe Matthew. Do you want to have a go at that?
Well, I think one of the key advantages of having a national unit would be that as we, as a country, face challenges like the one we're currently facing, that we have some collective unit that can bring capacity together, can bring the universities together with our professional bodies, local government and so forth, and start to work through ideas. At the moment, we're sort of floundering. Lots of ideas are put out there on Twitter or whatever, but there's nothing to bring together a really convincing strategy. And whether it's COVID or obesity or many of the other challenges we face, a national unit can really help to provide the focus for that sort of knowledge and collective effort.
Okay, let me ask now, put this one to Chris. This is a question from, forgive my pronunciation, but Biljana Savic, I'm going to say. How does the proposal for the design unit link with the recommendations of the Building Better, Building Beautiful Commission?
Essentially, it comes straight out of it. One of the commission's asks was for a monitoring unit to sort of to monitor progress, and I think this is taking that point and moving the conversation forward. And actually, we accept that we need to sort of monitor progress, but I think it can be a longer term thing about how we help to deliver design quality going forward and into the future.
Okay, I'm going to break my own rule here and ask Paul Morsley to unmute himself because I don't really understand his question, but the top bit I'd like to ask, which is to talk about the importance of education. And he's also going to mention an example from Denmark. Could you tell us about that example, Paul?
Yeah, well, it's, hi, hope you can hear me. It wasn't really about a specific example from Denmark, but we had a speaker come to the Architecture and Built Environment Committee at the Scottish Parliament a couple of years ago. The key thing that came out of that for me was that as a population, the people of Denmark were very much about design, right from early years all the way through to their lives, how they live their lives. And I think that's one of the things when I look at some of the schemes we have up here in Scotland, it's about the physical objects rather than about the place. And that was really what I was trying to get to, that we need to educate people. We're all on this conversation as people who are already converted. And we need to try and get that conversion out to a wider population. So that was really where I was coming from there. Okay,
thank you. David, have a go at that maybe?
I can take that. I think it's interesting how we do in my practice a lot of consultation with local communities, and part of what you always have to do is show them what's possible, because if you ask many people what they want, they will tell you what they've seen. They'd like a semi-detached house in a cul-de-sac, all the things that we probably wouldn't want to do, and you get into difficult territory of saying, well, are you know better than them what they should want. Then you show other stuff. You say, well, this is possible and this is possible, or the stuff in Norwich is possible. And they go, oh, I hadn't realized that was a possibility. And you get a whole different conversation going on. So I think the wider sort of proselytizing of good design, both in the professional community, but also in the wider public, is really, really important and one of the roles of this unit.
Okay, thank you. I'm now going to take a question from Pierre Williams. I'll just précis it. I think an interesting one. Is there a case for an arbitration body for schemes deemed unviable, like Farringdon, for instance? Who wants to have a go at that, arbitration? If nobody puts their hand up, I'll have to go to the next question.
I'm not sure that we necessarily felt that that type of very hands-on, almost sort of regulatory role was something that this unit would get involved with. The unit would be more about using the soft powers of government to try and influence and maybe cajole and encourage local authorities, house builders and others to engage with design. I think those more regulatory functions are best dealt with by perhaps the planning inspectorate or an organisation like that.
Okay, thank you. Tim Hagyard here appears to be delivering a rather heretical question. Actually, could you unmute yourself, Tim, so I can hear this? What he's saying is the presumption in favour of sustainable development. Does this test undermine design considerations in planning? Tim, could you just gloss that a bit?
Yes, I mean, thank you for asking me to comment on that. There's so many things that will contribute to it. We do need a design culture. I'm just raising one particular point, though, that the planning system in the UK is heavily sort of legally based. Lots of lawyers are involved in it. We have these very fundamental sort of legal tests, and it tends to frame everything about the way we think and the way sort of local planning committees are directed to think and officers think. We have a presumption in favour of sustainable development, which actually drives through unsustainable development. And just speaking for the CPRE, we know that we're seeing extremely poor development all over the countryside, sprawling development, much of it as examples we've had there. So my suggestion was actually, if you fundamentally could take those qualities that should be avoided, I mentioned place ladder, for instance, and said that this is unsustainable development, I think you would immediately get a shift in terms of the priorities and the way that you assessed schemes.
I'm not sure. I'm maybe a bit thick here and don't understand the terms, but I'm wondering what it is about a presumption in favour of sustainable development would be a problem. And I also
well, at the moment it's driven by housing numbers. So if a local authority doesn't have a housing supply, there's sort of this immediate weight given to the fact that they're short of housing. And pretty much everything else then goes by the board. And I'm not saying that you can't argue about design within that context, but it definitely pushes it down the line. You know, it pushes it to the back burner, where really we want design to be at the forefront of our thinking and sustainability.
Okay, thank you very much, Tim. I should observe that I'm very worried about that swan behind you. It hasn't moved all the time you've been talking. And the ripples appear to be static. That is some extraordinary time warp freeze place that you are living in there. But thank you for that. Anyway, let's go to a question from Harriet Perry, which is what about development? What about redevelopment, conversion of heritage buildings to capitalise on local vernacular architecture? Obviously some pros and cons for that. Who would like to talk on that? Matthew, would you like to comment on that? I mean, I have a personal interest in it because, as I mentioned earlier, my brothers are involved in repurposing old buildings. And I know there's a lot of talk amongst architects now about really trying very hard to preserve old buildings because of the embedded carbon and the massive carbon cost of knocking them down and building again. Could you have a few thoughts on that, Matthew?
Well, I think, heritage is obviously a critical part of building good quality places, and I think heritage should certainly firmly be part of the remit of a design quality unit, at least as far as getting it into the conversation, part of the conversation, so that it's not left out or seen as a sort of a different sort of specialist thing on its own, but it is really centrally part of building high quality places. So I would very much see that as being, part and parcel of this broader remit around quality and a culture of design.
Okay, let me ask you again, just while you're there, the question from Stefano Smith. I don't know what you think to this one. What opportunities are there to share learning from relationships with the NHS and others to push the design agenda? I mean, I know there's been some really interesting work done in hospitals in Africa to have really sustainable hospitals with internal, properly regulated internal ventilation, so people get lots of air and stuff. I mean, is the NHS looking towards more sustainable design, or is it still into the sort of factory medical system?
Well, certainly Public Health England have been doing a lot of work on design quality and how health can be built into places. They've had this sort of new towns analysis program that they've been running, and they put out some excellent guidance helped by the Town and Country Planning Association, which links planning and design quality and placemaking. Now, that's a great example of an organisation taking an initiative, putting out guidance, but then that sort of guidance sitting there in a sort of slightly isolated bubble. And I think what we are arguing is whether it's heritage, whether it's health, whether it's another dimension, we need something that brings them together and makes the connections. And so hence coming back to this idea of a design quality unit.
Okay, thank you. I'm also going to go now in person, because it sounds really interesting, this, to Mia Whittam, who's either from Sweden or who knows about Sweden and has an interesting thought. Mia, have you got a swan? Or are you just going to talk in a normal way like those of us stuck in their studies? Are you there?
Oh, I'm unmuted.
He hasn't got a swan.
No swans here, I'm afraid, in Suffolk. Yes, I am from Sweden. I work in the UK. I'm a landscape designer and I work quite a lot on housing developments in the East Anglia region. And my experience is that when I go home to Sweden, which is where I grew up and lived my first 20 years, housing developments tend to focus very much on the existing site characteristics. So it's very much looking at what's here already and enhancing these qualities. Whereas my experience in the UK is that we're trying to start with a completely clean slate. So we try to get rid of everything on the plot and then we start building. And I think we're really missing a trick here in terms of creating that sense of space and actually creating unique places and not them all looking the same all across the country.
Right. And can you give me some examples of what sort of features people would take into account?
So obviously in Sweden, we have quite a lot of natural landscape. It's a big country, but even in sort of suburban areas outside Stockholm, for example, it would be sort of existing trees and woodlands. It's in terms of the landscape approach, it's not about making everything look really neat and tidy. We kind of just like groups of trees and some rock and a little bit of mess, because it's a little bit of, it's not mess to me, but it's a little bit of wild and a little bit of a sort of woodland on just a few square meters that sits smack bang in between a few houses. And it's retaining those characteristics that is sort of, is really pushed, I think. And that's what I notice a lot.
Yeah, interesting thought. Of course, in the UK greenfield sites, you'd just better get a bit of cowpat, wouldn't you? Which probably would be less charming. But anyway, thank you for the thought. I'm being told that Arthur has got his hand up. I'm not sure who Arthur is or why he's got his hand up, but apparently I should go to him. Arthur, where are you? Does Arthur still have his hand up?
Hello, Roger. I think Arthur is not in the meeting anymore. I cannot find him. Yeah.
Perhaps we should have asked him earlier. Okay, this is one we were talking about earlier when we were in the kind of pre-chat, which is what impact could the shift to home working have on the design of sustainable places? Now, I've been writing quite a lot about this myself. My own view is that most people, or a lot of people, if they can, will plump for a hybrid system in which they work partly at home and partly from the office. But it will mean that some people are going to have to think about what sort of homes they produce in future where there are suitable working spaces. So perhaps, you know, is there going to be a call for the old-fashioned box room to be reintroduced for a study? That box room having a nice view, of course, because you'd want a nice view in the office. I mean, what sort of changes is this coronavirus and the resulting flexible working going to have on our places where we live, both narrowly in terms of a home and more broadly in terms of neighbourhood? David, you haven't spoken for a bit, or have you? Well, either way, you have a go.
I think that's true. We just submitted for planning a scheme in Sheffield which went through from all the things you need for home working, from broadband connections to space within the home to even meeting rooms commonly shared between the houses. I think that is something that housing design needs to take on. I also think, however, that we've said this before, when the internet became widespread, we thought cities would no longer be required. After 9/11, people said New York would never have offices again because who would go and work in New York? And I think cities are massively robust in the way they bounce back. And so I think we will change the way we operate, but I don't think it means the death of cities.
Yeah, I mean, the New York example is interesting. There was a survey out recently by Weston Williamson Architects, probably Chris Williamson's probably in the room, but his survey suggested that in New York there was a very low percentage of people who wanted to work from home. But that may be based on the fact that, you know, New York apartments are typically small and extremely expensive, and you can't wait to get out of it. Anybody else on this? On this thought, Sarah, have you got any thoughts on how if things will change, and if so, how?
Yes, thank you, Roger. I mean, I think one of the main things that this has brought up is how it's the social value of design, which is really important, not just the investment or the economic value, because it's your health and well-being. So those people that are living in small flats, shared housing, without outdoor space are, you know, climbing the walls, frankly, especially if they've also got children and they're trying to homeschool. So it's that connection between indoors and outdoors, I think, also needs to be rethought, and places where you can then walk, perhaps to public transport or to shop or to do whatever you're now going to do, and maybe your workplace will become completely different. It might not be an office, you might just be going to another separate space, but perhaps outside your home. I mean, the Centre for Ageing Better has got huge figures about the link between health and well-being and where we're living, and that's been highlighted right now up and down the country. You know, you can hear people talking about how difficult this is, but also high streets. Think about those, because they are going to change, and are there opportunities to think again about how some of those spaces are used, how some of those offices are used. And I don't want to get into that contentious territory about offices without windows and people having to live in them, but I think there will be a different way that we need to think about those and how they interact together.
Yeah, an architect friend of mine told me that it wasn't impossible to repurpose large offices because so many of us expect forcibly ventilated bathrooms and kitchens anyway, so you'd stick them in the middle and have the nice ones on the outside. But look, I'm very sorry to say that it's 2 minutes past 11, and that means this meeting has to end. I have to say it's been incredibly productive from my point of view, and we have got loads and loads of questions unasked. So I'm sorry about that if we haven't got to you. But it's a tremendously rich subject. I mean, I personally, you know, I'm optimistic at the quality of the ideas that have been discussed and the ideas offered, but really aware that, you know, money is going to be tight and people are going to find all sorts of reasons for saying no. So I'm going to close now and just hand it back to Matthew to talk about next steps. Matthew.
Thanks very much, Roger, for your chairing today, and thanks to everybody. Next steps, we will be taking all of your comments that you've given us today and in other fora, and we'll be reflecting on them. We'll produce a little note and we'll circulate it around, hopefully to everybody, in terms of what is the sort of common feeling that has come out of the meeting today. Hopefully we'll see whether government and others might be interested in talking to us about taking forward these ideas, and let's keep the conversation going. Thank you very much.